Garry Kasparov famously said that at the end of the day, the difference between chess players simply comes down to the number of patterns that they can recognize. For example, in the current position, it is white to move, and if you are familiar with the Greek gift sacrifice, it's fairly easy for you to notice that bishop takes h7 wins the game. Versus if you've never seen this pattern before, then even noticing this idea is very hard, let alone to calculate all the consequences. Now, so far it's pretty clear, but here's the difficult part. In chess there are so many tactical patterns, and trying to learn them and to practice them is overwhelming. Good news, most of those patterns are actually either very rare or very advanced, and you're not really going to face them unless you're a pro. So for this video I've selected the top 10 most useful tactical patterns for you to know to reach the level of 2000. Here's the first pattern, really loved by all the beginner players. It is when you almost won the game and you just need to finish it off. By the way, it is white to move. You can think about this as I'm talking. How would you play here if you are white? And it's so common for white to just play king e6, trying to deliver queen to d7 checkmate on the next move, but all of a sudden computer tells you that it is a draw because of a stalemate. And by the way, for every pattern I'll show you two examples. One is real simple like this, just to illustrate the point, and second one is more practical and more advanced. Here's the game between two players. It's the online blitz game, and both are rated about 3200. Quite impressive. At this position, white is up a piece and he's winning the game. He's about to grab this pawn on g6, so white certainly wins the game. However, black noticed that the king on h4 is actually restricted. Moreover, after white grabs this pawn on g6, that makes the king completely immobile. And black found a tricky idea. He played rook c4, pretending like he wants to counterattack the pawn. White grabbed this pawn on g6, and here black changed his mind and played rook c1 check, which just naturally moved the king away, but it turned out to be a blunder, because after rook to h1...
Yeah, that was funny.
It turns out that however white captures the rook, it leads to a stalemate and a draw. So even really strong players can be upset with the stalemate idea. The next pattern probably occurs in virtually every game that you play, and it is called a pin. It is when a piece is attacked, but it can't move away because it has to shield a more valuable piece standing behind. The knight cannot move, that would expose the rook. Otherwise, if black wants to save their rook and move it somewhere, they're gonna lose the knight and white is gonna win the game. Here is a more advanced example of the same tactical idea. You may think about this yourself for a couple seconds and then we'll discuss it. By the way, I'm recording this video because you guys have asked me about this in comments to my previous video. Therefore, if you have any other questions, let me know in comments below and I'll consider it for my next videos. Okay, let's come to this position. Here we can see that the bishop is pinned to the rook on e7. Therefore, naturally, white wants to attack this bishop. But you gotta be careful, because if you play pawn f4, attacking the bishop that way, then not only the bishop can actually go back and defend their rook at the same time, which would be an easy way for black to escape, they can actually even go forward and counterattack you. Now your king is in check and you gotta defend the rook. So white needs to be careful. f4 does not work. White can also try to attack this bishop with their own bishop, let's say bishop b2. And even though the bishop is seemingly pinned, it turns out that actually it still can move. It can move to d6 and guard the rook, and white cannot win. Therefore, let's take this back. Bishop f4 would be a stronger attempt, because this way we use actually two pins. Not only we're still using this pin, but we're also using the pin to the king, and that is called an absolute pin, because the bishop cannot move away at all. Versus if we pin the bishop down to the rook, which is called a relative pin, the bishop is restricted, but still it can theoretically move. So bishop f4 is a stronger attempt. Now black has to take. Now rook takes c7, and white won the exchange. Pretty good. Now let's take it back. But actually the strongest idea for white would be to first replace the bishop by the rook, and only then use this absolute pin. Now black is completely defenseless. We're gonna take the rook, and we're gonna be a piece up with an easily winning endgame. The next tactical motif is also extremely often. It is called a fork. It's when a single piece attacks multiple pieces of your opponent, and therefore your opponent cannot save each piece at the same time. Now in this position you may wonder, hey, but how about white just grabbing the pawn? Well, black uses the same motif once again with queen to a5 with yet another double attack, and this time white is surely defenseless. Black is gonna grab the bishop and gain a winning material advantage. This time it's white to play and win. You may think about the position as well for a few seconds, and later on you may also let me know in comments how many positions you could solve before I reveal the solution. Here white wins with this royal fork, knight to d8, checking the king and attacking the queen. Actually, when one of the attacked pieces is your opponent's king, this kind of a fork is the strongest, because your opponent has no time to defend anything. He's got to move the king out of a check, and then you just grab the hanging piece. And in this case, it results into yet another fork. This time black has to do something to guard their rooks, but at the end of the day, we end up with an extra knight. Here comes the tactical motif number 4. By the way, I gotta confess that although I promised you 10 tactical motifs, in fact I'm gonna share 9, plus one extra thing that I'm ashamed to talk about, but I have to. Anyway, we'll talk about that in a moment. Right now it was black to play, and black noticed that this pawn on a2 is hanging. They decided to grab it, but they missed the tactical motif known as the back rank mate. It is when you attack your opponent's king along the back rank, and the king has no way to escape because his own pawns of his castling block the way out, and you win the game. They can cover up one time, but after that, that is still a checkmate. This time it is white to move, and it is more complicated. You just need to make some calculations. But the move rook to e8 check still wins the game. Although black has 2 rooks, but white has 3 attackers, and therefore at the end of the day, after we trade off everything, we reach the same checkmating pattern position. The next pattern is very useful to save a game when you are down in material and you're about to lose. Here black is up 3 pawns, but white can save the game with a tactical motif known as a perpetual check. Black gotta move the king away, and after this white continues to deliver checks, and after a couple repetitions the game ends with a draw after the position repeats 3 times. Here's how I fell victim to this tactical pattern. I was playing black, and black is up material, he should be winning. However, white has a threat of bishop takes g6, and if black recaptures, there is queen h8 mate. I noticed that, and I realized that I need to move my rook away, but then white's got a perpetual check idea. And although I saw it, I actually could not see the way out. How can I stop this? And I let it happen, although Stockfish says that black was winning, but it was not that easy to see. I played rook c7, and I actually allowed this thing to happen. White played bishop g6, and after knight recaptures, here comes a beautiful queen takes g6. White sacrifices the whole queen, because after that, they reach to this relatively unusual perpetual check situation where they can draw by repeating checks this way. The next motif is probably the one you've heard about. It's called a smothered checkmate. It looks pretty complex at first, but in fact it's easy to execute and it's really cool. So you really have a good chance of making this kind of checkmate in your own games. It starts with the queen e6 checks along this diagonal. Now the king has to go to the corner. It can't go here because of queen f7 mate. Therefore, the king has to go the other way. But after king to h8, you then check it with a knight. The only square is king g6. Now you play an impressive double check from your knight and queen, forcing the king to move. And after the king goes back to the corner of the board, this time you start playing brilliantly. You sacrifice your queen, which forces their own rook to barricade their own king, to lock it in the corner, and then you deliver this stunning checkmate by a knight known as the smothered checkmate. This time the situation is more complicated, but you still may utilize the same tactical pattern. While you're calculating this, let me also bring up a quick announcement that I've recently started my new Instagram account where I share quick tips, opening traps, and other helpful stuff which is not in the format of YouTube. Therefore, you can find me there. I'm gm.igorsmirnov on Instagram, or you can find a link below the video in the description, and we can be friends on Instagram. Black wins by playing knight f2 check. The only move is king e1. After this, knight d3 results into this double check. The king can't go here because of queen f2 mate. We know this stuff. Therefore, the king has to go the other way. But after that, we sacrifice the queen, locking the way out, which leads to this nice checkmate by a knight. The next tactical pattern is less known, but from analyzing a ton of my students' games, I can actually tell you that it is one of the most helpful patterns, especially in preventing blunders or making use of your opponent's blunders. And it is called hanging piece. Hanging piece is a piece which is not defended by any other piece of your opponent. Now, typically, when you just begin the game, most of your opponent's pieces are standing near to each other and they guard each other. Therefore, it is hard for you to attack them. However, throughout the game, sometimes you or your opponent can throw one of the pieces forward, making it undefended and also an easy target for your opponent, because it's a little bit isolated from the rest of the black army. And in this position, surprisingly, it was quite popular for white to play a move such as pawn to d4 or pawn to d3. White indeed wants to make use of this hanging piece on g5 and wants to grab it, but what white blunders is that their own bishop on c1 is also a hanging piece, and therefore black can just grab it and win the game. This time we have a bit more advanced example. You may try to find the solution on your own. Here it was black to play, and black found the way to make use of a couple of the hanging pieces that white has in this position. There is a move queen a5, which delivers a double attack, therefore black is going to win something on the next move. Now, at first, this may look like just a double attack tactics that we talked about earlier, and although it's true, like you can see that the real reason of why these became possible is because of those hanging pieces. And if in contrast to this, we can look at the black position, you can see that it's all very compact and all very well defended. All of his pieces are standing near to each other in a nice harmony, guarding each other, supporting each other, and in a position like that, it's quite difficult for black to blunder anything just because their position is so solid, and that's what you should aim at. By the way, Stockfish shows here that there is also an alternative and quite a fun way to win the game. It starts with the move d5, and after a pawn takes, there is another move that black can play, and I want to challenge you to try to find it. Please think about this move and write it down in comments below. By the way, it's not queen a5, right? So we already know that idea, so please try to find the other winning idea besides the move queen a5. In this position, black has just brought their queen out, aiming to attack this pawn on b2, and white played a tricky move pawn a3, kind of blundering the pawn, but after queen takes b2, it turns out that white has a move knight a4, which traps a piece. And you can see that there is some similarity with the previous tactical motif, a hanging piece, because you can often trap your opponent's piece when it's too far away from the rest of his army and if it's undefended. Here this queen went on this dangerous journey and became trapped. White controls all these squares where the queen could possibly go to, and therefore white wins the game. One of the most common ways to trap your opponent's piece is to go after his bishop. In this position of the Caro-Kann defense, white can play pawn h4, which looks mysterious. Black often doesn't get it and play the move they intended to play, pawn e6, which leads to g4, and all of a sudden this bishop is trapped. If it tries to go forward, white keeps chasing it away, and now the bishop is completely trapped. A Greek Gate Sacrifice is an old trap that still works really well across multiple different openings, both for white and for black. White wins the game, but bishop takes h7. Notice that one of the prerequisites for this sacrifice is black not having their knight right here on f6, because the knight from here does a good job guarding the king as well as many squares around, therefore we wish to push this knight away. But after that happens, bishop takes h7 really works. Now king takes, we go knight g5, check to the king. Here another little important nuance to be aware of is that our knight needs to be supported by the bishop. Otherwise black would be able to just capture it with their own queen. But luckily, like normally, you do have your bishop on c1, and therefore it's not a problem. Now knight g5 delivers check, and after the king goes back, we then throw our queen out, threatening this mate on h7. As they try to escape, we then play queen takes f7, because this pawn is no longer defended by the rook. The king has to go back, and then there is a forcing sequence, which is just useful to remember, which leads to this checkmate. There is a fallacy that the Greek game does not work when they have their bishop on e7 controlling the square g5, so you can't move your knight there. But in reality, you can still force the same Greek game sacrifice just by advancing your pawn to h4. And then you can still play bishop takes h7, and after king takes, you still go knight to g5 check, all the same stuff. And having this bishop right here is not helpful for black, because if they take, then after h takes, we open this file for our rook, which just adds up a tremendous power to our attack. The king has to return. Now we throw the queen out with a similar idea of delivering checkmate along one of these two squares, and even if they try to provide some escape, we can lock the door and then deliver this checkmate queen h8. And now it is the moment that I'm ashamed of so much, that's why I postpone it to the last. It is the 10th tactical motif, so to say, and it is flagging. Most people nowadays play Blitz online, and therefore time becomes a factor in a game. And flagging is when you try to win on time in an otherwise losing or a totally drawish position. In this case, it is Naroditsky against Nakamura, white to play. And what do you normally do in a position like that? Well, you resign. I mean, if you're an amateur player, maybe you try to run out of moves and then give up your rook and you hope for a stalemate. But if that's an online blitz, you can try to win on time, even though your position is completely lost. And that's what white decided to do right here. Now, of course, this idea has a shady reputation, because like you're trying to win in a completely losing position. But by observing different players as streamers, it feels like the common attitude towards this is that when your opponent flags you, that is totally unethical, but when you flag someone, that is okay. At least that's the impression that I had by observing lots of different players. Anyway, you let me know what you think about this, whether it's okay to do this or not. And like the thing about flagging is it's not just a hope for your opponent to run out of time. You can actually actively force this situation to occur with some specific techniques. And in this position, white play rook b7. Now, normally you do not move your rook away because you wait for your opponent to promote a new queen, and then you take it so that, your opponent does not have a queen. But when you try to flag them, one of the ideas is to keep pieces on the board to avoid trade-offs, making it more complex for your opponent. And the other thing is to deliver checks, because as you deliver checks, your opponent cannot pre-move, and he'll have to play a move with his hand and lose some time. Now, after rook b7, black play rook c8, actually utilizing the same idea. Now, he's if white pre-moved the move rook g7 prior to rook c8 check, this move will be impossible to play, and therefore white will have to waste time and move the king away. So white played king b4, black queen here, and now king a5. Another nice idea. When you feel like you're gonna be checkmated soon, it is useful to try to run away with your king in the opposite direction, trying to delay the inevitable checkmate, but by delaying that, you still hope that your opponent runs out of time. So I played king a5, like played king f3. Actually, he was probably expecting rook g7 move, so probably king f3 was a pre-move. By the way, if you're not familiar, a pre-move is a move that you highlight while your opponent thinks about his move. You can pre-move and otherwise indicate for a computer which move to play automatically, right? So black probably expected this check to come, and they pre-moved king f3, and here comes king b6, another tricky move which is useful to remember. Now, normally in a chess game you grab a pawn, right? You just win material. But when you try to flag your opponent, you want to keep pieces on the board, keeping it complex so that your opponent has to think about his moves. He cannot play just automatically. And so instead of capturing, white goes king b6, and he wants to hide right there so that black still needs to think how to checkmate him. Black played king e1, king a7, white still, does not capture the pawn. He's still trying to keep it complicated. Queen e3 check. This time white has to take rook c5, and black is trying to come up with some sort of checkmate. So white goes rook b6, once again providing an escape square. Queen a3 check, king b7, queen a5. And another weird thing about flagging your opponent is that, you want to avoid even black sacrificing the queen this way, because after this, blacks will only need to get rid of these two final pawns, and even if black runs out of time, that's going to be a draw because white will not have any material besides his king. So you want to avoid that, and white play rook c6. He says, you know what, if you want to trade, I'll get a passer. So black tried something like this, rook takes d5, king d7, same idea. White feels that his king can be checkmated there, and he tries to run away in the opposite direction to delay the checkmate. Black played queen e8. Perhaps he wants to sack the queen, so white plays rook c7. It's weird how you run away from your opponent trying to sacrifice a queen. Queen a5, same idea. Perhaps black wants to take here. White goes rook c6, queen b5. This time, finally, black captured the rook. It can't move because of the pin. King c7, rook c5, and now white feels that, the exchange is inevitable, and he goes king d7. He's just trying to run away in the opposite direction. Queen takes, rook a5, and after king f6, white is again trying to run away in the opposite direction, and actually at this point Nakamura ran out of time and lost. He was just one move away from reaching a draw, but he lost because of that flagging technique, which, as we see, is a modern day art.
King? He wins! How did he do that?
Knowing tactical patterns is certainly helpful because you can recognize them while playing chess, but nevertheless, solving tactical drills versus playing can be a completely different experience. And therefore I've recorded another video where I share with you how to think, like 3 simple rules that allows you to find attacking moves and to find tactics in your own games. You can click the video right there and check it out. Or if you wish to level up your chess overall, I recommend that you head on to this free masterclass by clicking the link up there.